Since the reinstatement of the capital punishment in the US, Arizona carried out 41 executions. This is part 1 of the series. Donald Eugene Harding, April 6, 1992, gas chamber. Between December 1979 and January 1980, Harding carried out at least 7 murders across several states, including California, Arizona, Texas, and possibly Arkansas. He was convicted of 3 of those killings, and in 1992, he was put to death in Arizona's gas chamber for 2 of the murders committed in that state. His execution marked Arizona's first since the nationwide reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Harding's death was not officially declared until 10.5 minutes after the cyanide pellets were released. Throughout the execution, he fought violently against the straps that held him down. Television reporter Cameron Harper, who witnessed the event, described Harding's convulsions as lasting 6 minutes and 37 seconds, adding, "Obviously, this man was suffering. This was a violent death, an ugly event. We put animals to death more humanely." Another witness, journalist Carla McLean, recalled, "Harding's death was extremely violent. He was in great pain. I heard him gasp and moan." The execution had such a disturbing impact on observers that one reporter developed insomnia and various health issues for weeks afterward, while 2 others were described as being walking vegetables for several days. Harding ate a last meal consisting of fried eggs, several strips of bacon, toast with butter and honey, and orange juice. His last words were a string of obscenities directed towards the Attorney General. The gruesome nature of his execution fueled the push for Arizona to allow death row prisoners the option of choosing between the gas chamber and lethal injection. John George Brewer, March 3, 1993, lethal injection. Brewer was living in an apartment in Flagstaff with his girlfriend, Rita Brewer. In the early hours of November 11, 1987, the two got into an argument, with the tension centered around Brewer's heavy reliance on her. Later that day, Brewer told him she was planning to move out, explaining that leaving might force him to learn independence. Brewer reacted violently. He locked the bedroom door and launched into a brutal assault. The fight dragged on as he bit her, tried to gouge her eyes out, and strangled her with his hands. Eventually, he ended her life by tightening a tie around her neck. Brewer, who was 22 weeks pregnant at the time, never had a chance to escape. After the killing, Brewer paused to rest, took a shower, and then committed necrophilia by having relations with her body. Once finished, he left the apartment, walked to a nearby bowling alley, phoned the police, and surrendered himself. He later admitted guilt to first-degree murder. He consistently expressed that he was deserving of the death penalty and never appealed for mercy. Unlike Harding, witnesses said he went peacefully with the lethal injection. His last meal was 3 grilled pork chops with gravy, bacon, 6 fried breaded shrimp, beef rice-a-roni, 2 3-slices French bread with butter, applesauce, 2 cans Canada Dry ginger ale with ice, 1 slice coconut cream pie, 1 pint orange juice, 1 can chicken noodle soup with crackers, 1 can pear halves with syrup, Maxwell House coffee with cream and sugar. He didn't have any last words. James Dean Clark, April 14, 1993, lethal injection. In 1977, Clark spent much of the year working as a wrangler on a ranch in Elfrida, Arizona. On the morning of December 4, his time there took a horrific turn when he murdered 2 fellow ranch hands, George Martin Jr. and 17-year-old Gerald McFerrin. Martin was stabbed repeatedly in the chest, while McFerrin, who was also asleep when attacked, was shot 3 times in the head. Clark didn't stop there. Armed with a gun, he made his way to the home of the ranch owners, Charles and Mildred Thumb. He shot Charles twice, then killed Mildred with a bullet to the head as she slept. After the murders, Clark looted the house, taking money, credit cards, and jewelry. Before leaving, he slashed the tires of all the vehicles on the property to delay discovery, and then stole the Thumbs' car, driving it to El Paso. When speaking later to a friend, Clark boasted about the killings, remarking, "You should have seen Charlie when I hit him with those cutters." Upon his arrest, police discovered that he had even kept a grisly souvenir from the crimes, the bullet that had passed through the skull of one of his victims. For his last meal, he had porterhouse steak, medium rare, 2 pounds of large shrimp and sauce, A1 steak sauce, baked potato with sour cream, coleslaw, banana cream pie, rice pudding with raisins, 2 dinner rolls with butter, and a strawberry milkshake. His last words were directed to his wife, a woman he met while incarcerated. He said, "I love you," and then a few minutes later, he was dead. Jimmy Wayne Jeffers, September 13, 1995, lethal injection. In May 1976, Jimmy Wayne Jeffers and his girlfriend Penelope Cheney were taken into custody on charges of narcotics possession and receiving stolen property. Jeffers was unable to post his own bond, though he managed to secure it for Cheney, leaving him behind bars. While incarcerated, he discovered that Cheney had been cooperating with the police, providing information about his heroin operation. In retaliation, Jeffers attempted to hire another inmate to kill her, but a correctional officer intercepted the letter containing his plan. Upon securing his release in October, Jeffers immediately began plotting revenge against Cheney. He soon met a woman named Doris Van der Veer and moved in with her at a motel in Tucson. On October 20, 1976, Jeffers lured Cheney to the motel by offering her drugs. Once Cheney arrived, Van der Veer left the room, giving Jeffers an opportunity to be alone with her. When Van der Veer returned, she found Jeffers pointing a gun at her and instructing her to sit down. Van der Veer then saw Cheney lying on the bed unconscious, foam at her mouth, a sign of a heroin overdose. As a former nurse, she immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Jeffers coldly remarked that he had given her enough to kill a horse, and this girl still won't die. He proceeded to choke Cheney with her belt. When Van der Veer tried to intervene, he dismissed her concerns, claiming he had seen Cheney survive similar situations before. Even after Van der Veer checked Cheney's pulse and confirmed she was dead, Jeffers insisted that she inject the body with more heroin. He also physically assaulted Cheney, berating her with each strike. For 3 days, he left her body in the shower stall. When the stench became unbearable, the two wrapped Cheney's corpse in plastic and buried it in a shallow grave in a secluded area near Sedona. For his last meal, after requesting 3 pounds prime rib, 1 pound of crab legs, and 3 lobster tails, which DOC considered too extravagant, he was instead given 10-ounce steak, peas, rolls with butter, 1 baked potato with shredded cheddar cheese, strawberry pie with whipped cream, large chocolate malt. For his last words, he let loose a string of obscenities and then made an obscene gesture to his executioners and witnesses. Darren Lee Bolton, June 19, 1996, lethal injection. On the night of June 27, 1986, Bolton abducted a 2.5-year-old girl from her bedroom in her Tucson home. He carried her to an abandoned taxi, stripped her, essayed her, stabbed her once in the chest, and then dressed her again before leaving her to die. Her body was found several days later, on July 1st, by boys playing in the area. Bolton became a key suspect in Zosha's case in November 1990, when Illinois authorities, using the state's automated fingerprint indexing system, matched prints found on the window at the girl's home and in the abandoned vehicle to his own. Tucson police had submitted the prints to all states using the system in 1987, but Arizona did not participate. Bolton's prints were already on file in Illinois due to prior assault convictions in Champaign in 1984 and 1985. Remarkably, the match came during a routine training session for Illinois State Police officers. By this time, Bolton was already serving a prison sentence in Arizona for unrelated charges, including kidnapping, essay, and indecent exposure. Once he was charged with Zosha's murder, detectives linked him to the 1982 essay and murder of 7-year-old Katie Fritz, also in Tucson. He faced charges for her death as well. Court records paint a grim picture of Bolton's early life. He was shuffled between 2 unhappy, unstable, divorced parents. His mother forced him to stay awake all night watching TV with her, punishing him with a strap whenever he dozed off, and at one point nearly killed him with a knife. His father was equally abusive, calling him a loser and claiming he would achieve nothing. He frequently used physical violence to communicate and introduced Bolton to alcohol, Mary Jane, and cocaine at an early age. Bolton's father praised only the high marks on his school report cards, punishing him violently for anything less than an A or B, including once forcing his head through a plaster wall for lower grades. By the time he dropped out in the 11th grade, Bolton had already accumulated multiple assault charges. A court psychologist later reported that as a teenager, Bolton exhibited suicidal tendencies, reflecting the trauma and abuse that had shaped his formative years. He didn't have any last words, nor a last special meal. Louis Morin Mata, August 22, 1996, lethal injection. On the evening of March 10, 1977, Luis Mata and his brother Alonso were in their Phoenix apartment with Deborah Lopez. When Lopez attempted to leave, Luis stopped her and declared that they were going to essay her. Both brothers then beat her with a rifle and their fists before essaying her. After the attack, they drove Lopez away from the apartment. Luis Mata ultimately murdered her by slashing her throat with a knife, nearly decapitating her in the process. Alonso Mata was also convicted in connection with Lopez's murder and originally sentenced to death, though his sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment. Alonso later claimed that he, not Luis, had been the one to kill Lopez, but the courts dismissed his confession. During the trial, defense attorneys alleged that Judge Stanley Godfarb used racial slurs, specifically referring to Mata as a wetback. However, a later ruling determined that the judge had merely repeated language used by the defense in court. Years after his sentencing, Luis Mata's legal team argued that he had been born with hydrocephalus, which is water in the brain, and had sustained brain damage as a result of childhood abuse. Despite these claims, Mata remained on death row for over 19 years before his execution. For his last meal, he had 2 beef burritos, 2 pork chops, French fries, and jalapenos. He didn't have any last words. Randy Greenawalt, January 23, 1997, lethal injection. Greenawalt received a life sentence for the 1974 murder of a trucker who was asleep in his cab at an Interstate 40 rest stop near Winslow, Arizona. In a chilling act, Greenawalt marked an X on the trucker's door near his head before shooting him through it. He later admitted to killing another trucker in Arkansas as well as a man in Colorado. On July 30, 1978, Greenawalt escaped from Arizona State Prison alongside Gary Tyson, aided by Gary's son Ricky, Ray, and Donnie. The following night, the group committed a horrifying spree in Yuma County, kidnapping and murdering John and Donelda Lyons, their 2-year-old son Christopher, and their teenage niece Teresa Tyson with a shotgun. Afterward, the gang traveled north, changing vehicles multiple times, and appeared to have murdered the newlywed couple, James and Margene Judge, in Colorado, before taking the Judge's van and heading south again. On August 11, 1978, the gang evaded a roadblock in Pinal County, but during a subsequent attempt to stop the van, law enforcement fired on it, killing Donnie Tyson. Greenawalt, along with Ricky and Raymond Tyson, were apprehended, while Gary Tyson managed to escape into the desert, only to be found dead several days later. Ricky and Raymond, both under 20 at the time, were initially sentenced to death, though their sentences were later reduced to life imprisonment on appeal. The search for the Tyson gang became the largest manhunt in Arizona history, exposing flaws in the state's prison system, where favored inmates had unusually lax oversight. Their story was later adapted into a made-for-TV movie starring Robert Mitchum as Gary Tyson. Greenawalt himself endured 19 years of legal proceedings before his execution. His last meal was a cheeseburger, fries, coffee with milk. His last words were, "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." William Lyall Woratzeck, June 25, 1997, lethal injection. Linda Louise Leslie, a 36-year-old woman who functioned mentally at the level of a 15-year-old, rented a small sleeping room from Woratzeck in Pinal County. In the early hours of March 6, 1980, around 2:30 a.m., Woratzeck entered her room and launched a brutal attack. He beat Leslie with a hammer, stabbed her 3 times with a steak knife, and strangled her with such force that bones in her neck were broken. After the murder, he stole roughly $107 and set the shed on fire, incinerating her body. On the day of his execution, at the moment he was strapped to the lethal injection table, Woratzeck declared, "I want the state of Arizona to know they are executing an innocent man. Tell my wife I love her and tell the rest of my family I love them." His attorneys and family maintained until the end that his conviction rested solely on circumstantial evidence. The most significant proof against him was found on the clothing he wore that night, which contained bodily fluids that could have belonged to Leslie and fibers matching the carpet at the crime scene. Woratzeck consistently claimed he did not kill Leslie. He was unsure who did and believed certain key facts had never been fully investigated at trial. In a telephone interview from death row, he revealed that although married at the time, he did have a relationship with Leslie and had introduced other men to her so they could also have relations with her. Among these men, he alleged, was a Casa Grande police officer. While his attorneys did not fully endorse Woratzeck's conspiracy theory, they argued that law enforcement abandoned the investigation too quickly and failed to explore other potential suspects. Woratzeck spent 17 years submitting appeals before his execution. His last meal was 16-ounce top sirloin steak medium rare, French fries, onion rings, 12 deep-fried butterfly shrimp, 1 whole cherry cheesecake, 1 case Pepsi Cola, 1 pot of coffee. Jose Jesus Ceja, January 21, 1998, lethal injection. On Sunday, June 30, 1974, Ceja targeted the Phoenix home of Randy and Linda Lyall with the intent to steal a large shipment of Mary Jane. Upon entering the house, he encountered Linda, who apparently resisted him. Ceja shot her twice in the chest before dragging her into the bedroom, where he fired at least 4 additional close-range shots to her head. When Randy returned home, Ceja used his own gun, which he had taken from a drawer, to shoot him 4 times. After committing the murders, Ceja packed a suitcase he had brought with him with 12 kilos of Mary Jane. To mask his actions, he removed the telephone receiver and left the television on, creating the illusion that someone was home. In a chilling display of deception, Ceja later attended the victims' funeral, assisted in moving their furniture, and even offered to help law enforcement track down the killer. On the day of his execution, at 12:01 a.m. Arizona time, the drapes were drawn open and Ceja lifted his head, spotting one of the witnesses. He smiled and even gave a wink. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "No, that's all right." As the death warrant was read aloud, Ceja's eyes blinked rapidly. 1 minute later, at 12:02, the lethal injection began coursing through his veins. During the process, his eyes continued to flutter, and he heaved 3 times. His mouth twitched, and it appeared as though he was exhaling air. At 12:05, Corrections Director Terry Stewart officially pronounced him dead. Ceja lay restrained on the gurney, his pale arms tightly strapped, a white sheet covering him from the waist down, and wearing a short-sleeved shirt. His last meal was 2 red chili beef burritos, 2 cans Coke Classic, 1 sliced cherry pie. Jose Roberto Villafuerte, April 22, 1998, lethal injection. On February 22, 1983, Villafuerte was arrested near Ash Fork following a disturbance while driving a car belonging to Amelia Chauville. He told authorities that Chauville, his girlfriend, and he had argued the previous day in his Phoenix trailer. He claimed that he had loosely tied her to prevent her from calling the police before leaving the trailer. When Phoenix officers entered the trailer, they discovered Chauville's body on the bed. She was clothed only in a blouse, bra, and panties, with her hands bound behind her back. One of her ankles had been tied to her hands with a strip of bedding, and her head was wrapped in a blood-stained sheet, bedspread, and long thermal underwear. A tightly wrapped strip of sheet had been forced into her throat. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of genetic material. Authorities concluded that Chauville died from gagging. Prosecutors alleged that Villafuerte had viciously beaten her and left her blood-soaked and restrained while she was still alive. They claimed it took the 47-year-old mother of 3 roughly 24 hours to die, ultimately choking on the rolled-up strip of sheet. Although Villafuerte, a Honduran national married to another woman at the time, admitted to assaulting Chauville, he insisted that he instructed 2 friends to untie her after he left the trailer. He claimed that those friends were the ones who essayed her and left her to die. Villafuerte remained on death row for more than 14 years before his execution. On the day of the execution, witnesses noted that the 45-year-old man displayed no remorse, claiming that he loved everybody and telling the victim's son that he would soon be with the Lord. His last meal was 1 broiled chicken, 9 corn tortillas, 2 tomatoes, 1 can of jalapenos, 2 cans of Pepsi, 1 4-ounce plate of rice. Arthur Martin Ross, April 29, 1998, lethal injection. On April 10, 1990, Arthur Ross contacted a 26-year-old real estate agent, presenting himself as a businessman interested in leasing a vacant office at the corner of Vina and Torneydale in Tucson. When the victim met Ross at the office, Ross shot him twice in the head with a 9mm handgun. After the murder, Ross stole the victim's wallet, which contained a credit card, bank card, and identification. He then used the bank card to withdraw roughly $800 from the victim's account at ATMs in Tucson and Casa Grande. Concerned by his unexplained absence, the victim's roommate and co-worker checked his appointment book and went to the office building where they discovered his body. Investigators tracked a series of credit and bank card transactions, which ultimately led to Ross's arrest in Casa Grande on April 14, 1990. He had no final words. His last meal was 3 grilled cheese and fried egg sandwiches, macaroni and cheese, a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream, and 2 cans of Pepsi. Douglas Edward Gretzler, June 3, 1998, lethal injection. On November 3, 1973, Gretzler and Willie Luther Stillman confronted Michael Sandberg at gunpoint in the parking lot of his Tucson condominium complex, forcing him into his home where his wife, Patricia, was studying. Once inside, they bound and gagged both Sandbergs. As night fell, Gretzler shot Michael while he lay restrained on the bed, then fatally shot Patricia as she remained bound on the living room couch. Stillman fired an additional shot into her body. After the murders, the pair stole the couple's credit cards, checks, camera, and car before fleeing to California. Authorities eventually apprehended Gretzler and Stillman in California, bringing an end to a violent crime spree that claimed at least 9 lives. Stillman was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but died in prison in 1987. Just before his execution, 47-year-old Douglas Gretzler said, "From the bottom of my soul, I am so deeply sorry and have been for years for murdering Patricia and Michael Sandberg. Though I am being executed for that crime, I apologize to all 17 victims and their families." His last meal was 6 fried eggs over easy, 4 strips of chewy bacon, 2 slices of buttered white bread toast, 1 cup of coffee, 2 Cokes. Derek Leonard Gerlaugh, February 3, 1999, lethal injection. On January 24, 1980, Gerlaugh, Joseph Encinas, and Matthew Leisure set out from Chandler to Phoenix with a deadly plan: to hitchhike and rob anyone who offered them a ride. Their victim was Scott Schwartz, a man with a leg injury who relied on a leg brace and crutches for mobility. At gunpoint, the three forced Schwartz to drive them to a remote location on the outskirts of Mesa. Once there, they launched a brutal attack. Gerlaugh directed Encinas and Leisure to hold Schwartz on the road while he repeatedly ran over him with a car, deliberately positioning the left rear tire on Schwartz's body and revving the engine to ensure fatal injuries. Because Schwartz appeared to still be alive, Gerlaugh and Leisure stabbed him 30 to 40 times in the head, neck, and shoulders with a screwdriver. They then abandoned his body in a nearby field, took $36 from him, and fled in his car. Following a joint trial, Gerlaugh and Encinas were convicted of murder. Encinas received a life sentence. Leisure pled guilty to first-degree murder and was also sentenced to life. In 1987, Gerlaugh was stabbed twice in the back by another inmate as prisoners returned from breakfast. Gerlaugh became the first Native American executed in Arizona since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. As part of his final rites, the Department of Corrections permitted him 2 hours in a sweat lodge to pray and purify himself, marking the first time a Native American with a death warrant was allowed this ancient ceremonial practice before execution. He didn't have any last words. His last meal was New York steak cooked medium rare, Worcester sauce, 2 eggs, 8 strips bacon, 2 slices bread toasted with butter, half a pint of peppermint ice cream, and 16 ounces apple juice. Karl-Heinz Lagrand, February 24, 1999, lethal injection. Shortly after 8 a.m. on January 7, 1982, Karl Lagrand and his brother Walter entered the Valley National Bank in Marana. Armed with a toy pistol, Karl attempted to coerce 63-year-old branch manager Ken Hartstock into opening the vault, but Hartstock was unable to comply, having only half of the combination. Frustrated, the brothers forced Hartstock and bank clerk Don Lopez into the office and bound them. They threatened Hartstock with a letter opener and began violently assaulting him. Hartstock ultimately succumbed to 24 stab wounds. Karl and Walter also attempted to murder Lopez, stabbing her 6 times before fleeing the bank. Following a jury trial, both were convicted on all charges. After considering mitigating and aggravating circumstances, the judge sentenced both defendants to death. Carl Legrand's last meal was 2 bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches on white bread, mayo, 4 fried eggs over easy, medium portion of hash brown potatoes, 2 breakfast rolls, a small portion of strawberry jelly, 1/2 pint of pineapple sherbet ice cream, 1 22 ounce of hot coffee, black, 1 medium slice of German chocolate cake with coconut caramel icing, 1 12-ounce cup of cold milk. His last words were, "I want to apologize to the family of Ken Hartsock and to the woman injured in the robbery attempt, Dawn Lopez." Walter Bernard Legrand, March 3, 1999, gas chamber. Walter Legrand was executed a week after his brother, but he chose to die in the gas chamber. His last meal was 6 fried eggs cooked over easy, 16 strips of bacon, 1 large portion of hash browns, 1 pint of pineapple sherbet ice cream, 1 breakfast steak well done, 1 16-ounce cup filled with ice, 1 7-Up, 1 Dr. Pepper, 1 Coke, 1 portion of hot sauce, 1 cup of coffee, 2 packets of sugar, and 4 Rolloids tablets. In his last words, Legrand apologized to the families of his victims first. "To all my loved ones, I hope they find peace. To all of you here today, I forgive you, and I hope I can be forgiven in my next life." As a white steam-like mist filled the room, Legrand began coughing, shaking his head and gagging several times. A few minutes later, his head slumped forward. He coughed again, lifted his head briefly, and then slumped forward once more. After that, he did not lift his head again, though over the next several minutes his shoulders continued to move involuntarily. The brothers were born in Augsburg, Germany, and moved to southern Arizona as children after their mother married an American serviceman. Carl was the first German citizen executed in the U.S. since World War II. The case drew widespread attention in Germany, which has no death penalty, prompting repeated diplomatic protests and an appeal to an international court. Governor Jane Hall rejected appeals from German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer and Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder to stay the execution. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.